My parents cut me off for refusing to fund their golden child's lavish lifestyle. Now they're begging for my help. Growing up in my family was like living in a two-person circus, except it wasn't quite as entertaining as it sounds. My younger sister, Jessica, was the star, always center stage, with my parents playing the adoring crowd. And then there was me, Ethan, the one who was expected to quietly stay in the background, doing the right thing. Jessica was the golden child. She was the apple of our parents' eye. Everyone knew it. As soon as she asked for something, it appeared as if by magic. New phone? No problem. A designer purse? Done. Impromptu trip to a tropical island? Check. Jessica was living the kind of life I could only dream about. My parents were more than happy to indulge her every whim without hesitation or second thoughts. Me? Not so much. I learned early on that nothing was handed to me. When I turned 16, while Jessica was handed the keys to a shiny new car, I was told, "If you want a car, you need to work for it." So I did. I worked part-time at a local cafe, flipping burgers and waiting tables, all while managing to keep my grades up and juggle extracurricular activities. I saved up for months to buy my own used car, barely affording the payments. But that was my reality. Hard work, no shortcuts. My parents never financially supported my education. I didn't get the luxury of their help. I took on student loans, applied for scholarships, and worked multiple part-time jobs to pay for my tuition. I had to build everything myself from the ground up. Meanwhile, Jessica dropped out of college after one semester. She didn't want to waste time on school when there was so much to enjoy in life. My parents didn't care. They had no problem footing the bill for her spontaneous trips, shopping sprees, and late-night dinners at expensive restaurants. At first, I was angry, but over time, I just became numb to it. After all, what could I do? I focused on my own path, determined to succeed on my own terms. By the time I graduated, I had a job lined up, a modest savings account, and even managed to buy my own house. I worked hard for everything I had, and I was proud of it. Meanwhile, Jessica's life became a never-ending parade of luxury, though it seemed to lack any purpose. The more she spent, the more my parents enabled her. She couldn't hold down a steady job and continued to rack up credit card debt, all while living the high life on their dime. But I kept my distance. She was my sister, and as much as it frustrated me, it wasn't my place to interfere. That is until one day when I received a call from my mum. "Ethan, we need to talk about Jessica," she said, her voice strained. The tone of her voice was enough to make my heart sink. I could already guess where this conversation was going. "What about her?" I asked, already dreading the worst. "She's in trouble, Ethan," my mum continued, her voice quivering. "She's run up a huge credit card bill and now she can't pay it off. We were hoping you could help her out." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Help her out how?" I asked. "Well," my dad interjected, "you've always been responsible, and you're doing so well for yourself. We thought maybe you could lend her some money to pay off her debts, until she gets back on her feet." "Are you serious?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady, but the anger was bubbling up inside me. "You want me to bail her out because she can't manage her own finances?" "She's your sister, Ethan. Family helps family," my mum said, her voice now pleading. I couldn't believe the nerve they had. After all these years of watching them give Jessica whatever she wanted, now they wanted me to clean up her mess. I thought of all the years I had struggled to get by without any financial support from them. I shook my head. "I worked my ass off for everything I have. I'm not going to give her a single penny. She needs to take responsibility for her own actions." My parents were furious. "You're being selfish. You've forgotten where you came from," my dad shouted. "Selfish? I'm the one who worked 3 jobs to put myself through school while she lived in a fantasy world," I retorted. But they didn't want to hear it. They told me I was ungrateful and that I was turning my back on family. And just like that, I became the villain in their eyes. The days after our argument were tense, and the air between my parents and me was thick with resentment. I hadn't expected them to understand, but the venom in their words stung more than I anticipated. I was still shaking with frustration, trying to process everything, when I received another call, this time from my mum again. "Ethan, I think we need to talk," she said, her voice soft, but with an underlying urgency. I already knew where this was headed. "Mom, I've made myself clear," I replied, trying to keep my voice neutral. But she persisted. "We're asking for your help, Ethan. Ethan, this is really important." I could feel my chest tighten. How is it that my whole life I've been doing everything myself, and now I'm supposed to help clean up Jessica's mess? "Ethan, please," she continued, her voice breaking slightly. "You're the only one who can help. We've tried everything with Jessica, but it's just too much for us. The debt is mounting, and she won't listen to us. You've always been so responsible. You have the means to fix this." I couldn't keep listening. "I told you already, I'm not helping her out. If she wants to live like she's on top of the world, then she needs to learn the consequences. I'm not her bank." There was silence on the other end for a long moment before my mom spoke again, this time in a quieter, more pleading tone. "Ethan, we're family. Families help each other. You know that." I pinched the bridge of my nose. "Mom, you can't expect me to just throw money at her because she refuses to grow up. I'm not going to enable her bad choices." At this point, my dad joined in. His tone was sharp and insistent. "Ethan, don't you see? You're the successful one. You've always been the one who gets things done. We're counting on you. You can help Jessica get back on track. It's just a few months, a little extra money to tide her over. We're not asking for much. You're the one who can fix everything." Their words hit me like a ton of bricks. You think just because I've worked hard to get where I am, I owe her something. My success isn't a free pass for her to be lazy and irresponsible. I felt like I was suffocating. Every ounce of respect I had left for my parents seemed to be draining out of me in that moment. Their complete disregard for my own struggles, their demand that I should sacrifice everything for someone who hadn't learned a thing, was beyond frustrating. And then they pulled the ultimate emotional manipulation card. "It's your sister, Ethan. You'll let her fail. You're going to leave her to drown?" At this point, I was beyond angry. I felt betrayed. These were the people who had watched me fight my whole life for every little thing, who had been so quick to dismiss my own sacrifices in favor of Jessica's entitlement. "You know what?" I snapped. "I've worked my entire life to avoid being like her. And now you want me to be the one who bails her out? I'm not your fallback, and I'm not her babysitter. If she doesn't learn how to stand on her own 2 feet, that's on her, not me." My parents were silent for a moment, their anger palpable, before my mum finally spoke, her voice shaking with a mix of frustration and hurt. "You're selfish. You're turning your back on family. What happened to you, Ethan? You've forgotten who we are." It felt like a knife to the heart, but I stood firm. "I haven't forgotten anything, but I'm not going to be a part of enabling this anymore. I'm sorry, but I won't do it." The call ended, and the weight of the decision hit me like a wave. I had just cut myself off from my family. The fallout was immediate. The aftermath of our conversation was worse than I anticipated. Over the following days, my parents' attempts to guilt-trip me grew more intense, and the anger in their words was like a constant buzz in the back of my mind. I had expected some resistance, but the way they turned everything around to make me feel like I was the one in the wrong, like I was the villain, was unbearable. It wasn't long before the social consequences of my refusal began to weigh heavily on me. The first major blow came when my parents stopped inviting me to family events. They didn't even bother to call me for Thanksgiving. At first, I thought it was just a fluke, but then came Christmas and Easter. The message was clear. I was no longer welcome. It didn't end there. My sister, Jessica, who had been surprisingly quiet during all this, decided to make her own statement. She posted on social media, complete with a carefully staged photo of her pouting next to an empty seat at a family dinner. The caption read, "When you're abandoned by the one person who was supposed to have your back. Family over everything." I had never felt more manipulated in my life. The comments under that post flooded in with support for Jessica, and suddenly I was the bad guy. My parents didn't back me up in any of this. Instead, they sided with her. It felt like everyone was turning against me, and all I could do was retreat further into myself. Despite the emotional toll, I held my ground. I wasn't going to let myself be dragged into this toxic cycle any longer. I focused on my career and started investing more time into the relationships that actually mattered, those outside of my family. But even then, it wasn't easy. As the months went by, I heard murmurs from mutual friends and acquaintances. Word spread about Jessica's continuing irresponsibility. She still refused to get a job, but she was constantly posting new vacation, photos from exotic locations, flashing designer clothes and attending lavish parties. Meanwhile, my parents, who had already been sinking deeper into financial trouble, continued to fund her lifestyle, even though she wasn't contributing a dime to the household. It was hard to watch. As much as I had distanced myself from it all, the knowledge of how far things had spiraled still weighed on me. I knew my parents were enabling her every bad decision, and nothing seemed to stop the downward spiral. Despite the hurt, I tried to move on. I threw myself into my work, found solace in friendships with people who valued me for who I was, and spent more time on my own hobbies. The isolation from my family was painful, but I began to realize that I had made the right choice. I was protecting myself from a toxic situation. But the storm wasn't over yet. It had been over a year since the fallout. My parents and I hadn't spoken much, and I had stopped following Jessica's social media updates. But one day, my phone rang. The number on the screen was my mum's. I hesitated for a moment before answering. I was still angry, still hurt, but something in me told me I needed to hear them out. "Hello? Ethan. It's Mum. We need to talk," she said, her voice trembling. "What's going on?" I asked, trying to keep my tone neutral. We need your help," she said after a long pause. My heart sank. I had expected it. I had known this moment would come, but that didn't make it any easier to face. "What's happened?" I asked. "Well, things aren't going well for us, Ethan," my mum began. "Your father's health has been declining, and we've been struggling to keep up with the mortgage and medical bills. We've made a lot of mistakes." I didn't know what to say. It was hard for me to feel sympathy when I had warned them for so long that enabling Jessica's behavior would only lead to disaster. "And Jessica?" I asked, knowing she was the root of all their problems. "She hasn't changed," my mum admitted, her voice cracking. "She's still living the same way, spending money on ridiculous things while refusing to take responsibility for anything. And now she wants more from us." I couldn't help the frustration that bubbled up inside me. "You've spent all this time supporting her, letting her live like a princess, and now you're asking me to help." There was a long silence on the other end. "Ethan, please, we're desperate. We were wrong. We didn't realize how much damage we were doing. We need you." I could hear my dad's voice in the background, his words faint but pleading. "Son, we messed up. Please, don't leave us high and dry." I felt a mixture of vindication and frustration. Part of me wanted to tell them, "I told you so," but the other part, an almost softer part of me, wondered if they were sincere. If they had finally seen the light and understood how badly they had failed, not just as parents, but as individuals. "Mum, what about Jessica?" I asked quietly. "She's asking us for more money, Ethan," my mum said, almost in a whisper. "She doesn't even know how to stop." I felt torn. On one hand, I wanted to turn my back on them completely. After all, they had done this to themselves. But on the other hand, they were still my parents. They were still family. Could I really turn away from them in their time of need? "I'll think about it," I said, my voice steady but conflicted. I needed time to process this. I couldn't just rush into helping them without being absolutely sure it was the right thing to do. Months went by, and heat pressure on me continued to build. I was torn between my sense of duty and the knowledge that I had done everything right in my life to avoid this kind of situation. But seeing my parents in their financial mess, my mum looking older, her hair greying more rapidly, and my dad spending sleepless nights fretting over bills, tore me apart. One evening, I sat in my living room, staring at my phone as I read the desperate text from my mom. "Ethan, we can't make it through this without you. Please." I sighed deeply, the familiar weight of responsibility settling on my shoulders. I thought about how much they had failed me over the years. I thought about the nights I spent alone, working hard, scraping by while they showered Jessica with everything she wanted. But I also thought about the guilt that had been eating me alive. No matter how much I resented them, they were still my parents. I made the decision. I picked up the phone and called them. "All right, I'll help," I said, trying to sound resolute, but knowing deep down that this would be the hardest thing I'd ever do. The conversation was long. My mum and dad were both shocked at how quickly I caved in. They apologized profusely, but they knew this was a small lifeline. I agreed to help them with the mortgage, pay off some medical bills, and ensure they had enough to survive. But there were conditions. I told them that if they wanted to continue relying on me, they had to promise to hold Jessica accountable. I laid out a plan. She needed to sell some of her luxury items, find a job, and contribute. They agreed. I made it clear, though, that this was the last time I would step in like this. I couldn't keep enabling their toxic dynamic, and neither could they. Helping them felt like a bittersweet victory. On the one hand, I had been able to alleviate some of their financial burdens, but on the other hand, I had done it out of obligation, not love. They thanked me, and the weight of their gratitude lingered in my chest. Still, I knew it wouldn't change everything. Jessica would continue to be who she was, and they would continue to enable her, as they had always done. In the weeks that followed, I made a firm decision. I couldn't keep putting my life on hold for people who had never really supported me in the way I needed. It was time to cut the ties that had held me back for so long. It wasn't easy, but I took small steps to distance myself from them. I started setting more boundaries, something I had never been able to do before. As for Jessica, I continued to hear updates through mutual friends. She was back to her lavish lifestyle, without a care in the world, still relying on my parents to fund her every whim. I didn't feel anger anymore, just sadness for her and for the family dynamics that had never changed. In the end, I realized that I couldn't keep going back to a place where I had been mistreated. I had to live my own life, make my own decisions, and create the family I wanted, whether or not that included my biological family. I moved forward. I focused on my career, my friends, and my personal growth. The relationships I built outside of my family became a source of strength and joy. And, as time passed, I realized that moving on wasn't just about cutting ties with my parents and Jessica. It was about finding peace within myself, and that meant not carrying the weight of their choices anymore. Now, I have to ask, was it the right choice to help them, or should I have walked away and cut all ties for good? What would you have done in my position? Let me know your thoughts in the comments.